My name is Darren. I'm an alcoholic. What's up, y'all? Really happy to be here. Um, yeah, I guess some of that was true. I don't know about making an impact on AA or young people's or anything. I mean, we've got the whole zombie apocalypse coming that someone's going to have to get us through. And so whoever manages that probably will have made a really big impact. But I've been in AA. I've been in AA 31 years and I've never left. I've always gone. And so to the extent that I've not been like a detriment, I suppose I've tried to be useful anyway. Um, yeah, I guess I'm interested to tell the story of this group from my perspective. Um, it seems like it might be fun on a kind of anniversary month. Yeah, 4 years ago this month, this group was founded. Um, I guess my interaction with it was well, a couple of things. Like as Fred mentioned, I'm sort of an itinerant laborer, intellectual laborer. I'm a professor, but I seem to only get hired for 1 or 2 years at a time. And so I've had the opportunity to travel around quite a lot since 2011 when I left New York City. Um, since then, I've lived in Louisiana, North Carolina, Ohio, Phoenix, and now Memphis. And when I left New York City, I had really enjoyed a long period there, a 13-year period where I was part of NICEPA and we hosted ICIPA in 2010. And it was really my AA home. I love the AA in New York City, both Manhattan and Brooklyn, and really felt like I found my AA home there. Um, I found excellent sponsorship there, lifelong friends there. So those were good years for me. So when I left there, I knew that I was going to have to find some other way of experiencing AA. And the first place I moved, this little town in Louisiana to teach called Hammond, it had terrible AA. Oh my God, it was terrible. It was one of those towns that like barely has a meeting a day. The clubhouse that you go to is like, they've got the, what do you call it? Like the celebrate recovery literature or something, like standing there in the meeting. So like I couldn't tell if it was an AA meeting. The one night of the week that there's like a proper home group, there are two home groups that meet at the same time across town in a town that doesn't have other home groups. So I knew that like something terrible had happened there and they hated each other. And that was indeed the case. So I was in for a rough go. But what it meant was like I knew I couldn't stay there. I knew I couldn't commit to teaching in a place where there wasn't AA that I could love and be a part of and see myself as making a contribution to. I used to say traveling in AA is amazing. Moving in AA sucks. Because I can if I'm traveling, I can handle any old Garbo AA meeting for tonight, and maybe like for the week. For the month, it gets a little painful, and for a few months, it's a nightmare. So I need good AA, and we say AA is everywhere, and it sort of is, but it's kind of garbage in some of the places where it exists, and that's just my experience of it. I've moved a bunch, and and I haven't always liked it, and I've known that I shouldn't say that. I should say that even when I've hated AA, if I go to it, it works for me. I don't enjoy it. I don't find friends there, but it still works. I still don't have to drink. Um, it's still a source of comfort and service, if not pleasure. But I want more from my AA, frankly. um, anyway, so I got the idea that I knew that I was gonna have to move again, and possibly a few more times. And I started to look for options, AA options for what can work for me when I'm moving or traveling. If I know that I'm gonna have to maybe do this a couple of times to find a permanent position, how am I going to have AA that isn't completely wiped off the face of the earth, every time I move? And I had met through ICIPA. I was on the ICIPA Advisory Council, and I met the year we hosted it in Phoenix, a woman who was on that committee who had served a 2-year term in Swaziland, which is a country sort of within the borders of South Africa. And I asked her, how did you do AA there? And she described to me this phenomena of the online meeting. And she talked about a meeting that she could access via Skype that she said was hosted in Europe but because the time zone matched well with South Africa, with Swaziland, she was able to attend a meeting quite regularly, and that there was a community of people, and it was very regular, and that the message seemed to be carried in that context very well. And so she invited me to attend the meeting, and so I was still in Louisiana, and I remember attending it twice as like a lunch meeting. It was sort of like in the early afternoon in Louisiana hours. And I immediately understood, like, oh, this can work. Like, this can actually work. There was no video, but you could hear people share, and you could hear the transmission of that quality in AA. I think of it as like honesty, or like someone's desire to tell the truth about themselves in a way that might make themselves useful to another person. You could hear that tone in the sharing. And I immediately understood this can work. This can carry AA's message. And so I became very curious about, like, did such meetings exist here in the US, and how do I join one, and where do I find one, and when are they? And I started to do a bunch of research, and what I found is that they did not exist readily. There were some telephone meetings. There were some kind of specialist sorts of meetings. I found the online intergroup and started to explore what was on offer. There seemed to be more meetings based in Europe, based in Asia, in Australia, seemed to have a few, but not much here in the US. And so about 9 months prior to this group starting, so I guess it was like January of 2013, I started a group, an online group on Skype called the Anyone Anywhere group. And I just invited friends to it. Some of you I invited to it. I like ruthlessly invited people to it constantly. And it's Tuesdays and Thursdays, 10:30 p.m. Eastern. It still exists. It's coming up on its 5-year anniversary. And that really became my baby. Like, that group, like I just sort of dedicated myself to it. It became my home group. And it did, in fact, last me through several moves, which was exactly what I was hoping for it to do. And once I knew that worked, that the online meeting model worked, I started to feel like it was really underutilized. And in particular, at ICIPA, we would from time to time get a request for help from someone very young or their parents who were isolated geographically, who weren't near existing young people's meetings. And we got one such request for help from a woman whose 15-year-old lived in rural Oregon. And I became interested. I knew now that we could help him, this young person, if only we had a group like this. But we didn't have it yet. And so I believe I proposed to the ICIPA web committee. Isn't that right, Laura? Like we wrote up, like I talked about it with a few people who'd been on Anyone Anywhere, and kind of wrote up to the advisory, the ICIPA Advisory Council's web committee, a proposal for a meeting. I think I called it, had a terrible name. I believe it was called the non-geographic solution. Whatever, it was a dumb joke.
Cure.
What was it?
Cure, non-geographic cure, right?
Yeah, non-geographical cure. Thank you. Thank you. And the advisory council didn't really know what to do with it. They were like, we can't start a meeting, like, what are we? We're like a committee. We shouldn't be starting an AA meeting. And I was like, yeah, but what else are we going to do to help these kids? And we got to thinking about, there were actually some other things we could do. And I think we ended up considering a lot of our attempts to put the speakers from ICIPA online as like part of this kind of broader attempt to make resources available such that we could, to young people anywhere. And yet we also felt like it wasn't really our place to start an AA meeting. So what we needed were some young people who would be willing to take the meeting on. And Mervs, Mary Beth talked a couple of weeks ago, and she kind of admitted, I think, that like she did it because she thought it would make their bid look good for ICIPA. I suppose it worked. We certainly awarded them ICIPA. I don't know that was the sole reason, but it didn't hurt in my mind, I suppose. But what we found were like some young people who were interested to kind of take the meeting on. And I think I tech hosted the first ones, maybe even like the first month of meetings on Skype. And I believe it was on the very first meeting. It was BB, I think. We were just calling people in on Skype. We were just blowing people up on Skype to try to get them into the meeting. Like, it wasn't even like, come to an AA meeting. It was more like the AA meeting's coming to your phone. Pick up the phone. And I remember BB was like, what is this? And when she started to like get the idea of like what it was, that there were like people she knew and people she didn't know who were all sober, and we were on like the first young people's online meeting, she was like, oh my God, this is like the fifth dimension. And I think there came the name. But we were still under a Skype name called the non-geographical cure. And so I think we did that for a month for consistency's sake. We did a month on non-geographical cure. And then the group's conscience, I think, was very clear that 5D was really the right name for the group. And so we just recreated everything, all the accounts, really within the first month after the founding. And the group has been, cooking along ever since, attracting a broad variety of people and an audience, a worldwide audience. And sorry about my dog. Continuing to innovate its uses of technology, performing service, through ASL and otherwise, that is really like unheard of and undiscovered through much of AA. And I feel lucky to have been sort of positioned in a place where I could be aware of the kinds of problems that the isolation of young people from others, could cause, right? That it's actually quite difficult for young people to get sober, isolated from other young people, and quite easy often when we find ourselves in the meetings. And that I was aware that there's a way to host these meetings that could at least carry the message. Yeah, glad I got to be there. What a good moment. What a good moment to be there and to be able to just facilitate something happening. And, like every other group, like it's, it matters who shows up to it week to week, who cares enough to tune in, to dial in, to call in. And so the credit really is to you guys, the group, the members who do the work day to day, the regular attendees. And that's one of my favorite things about AA is made up not by the people who founded it, but by the people who show up to the meetings every day. It gets remade entirely every day. And so it's available. It's constantly available. I don't know. So I don't know. Whatever. It's nice to come back and tell that story, but it's mostly for you guys, so the history of the group, because another technology change is coming, right? This probably isn't the end point. And so maybe if you have that sense of that what's required is maybe to, I don't know, take a risk, take a leap, like observe a need, hear a need articulated from an AA member or from an alcoholic, and then try to meet that need and whatever the technology is that comes along. Probably that's the principle I'd like to pass along, is that like AA is not already working great for all of us everywhere. It's still really hard to find for a bunch of people all over the world. But this technology, once the zombie apocalypse comes, this is going to be it. Like, it's going to be too dangerous to walk outside. And then all those oldsters who like slag us and shit talk this kind of AA, they're going to need it bad. They'll be begging for that Zoom hookup. I ran into in Atlanta. I ran into a regional trustee, and I was telling him about our group. And I said, yeah, we meet. I don't know what we were on at that point. We meet via Skype or Fuse or Zoom or whatever. And he said, you don't really meet, but I know what you mean. And it was like just his way of like slagging us for no reason. Like it served no purpose in the conversation. And I remember just like kind of smiling through that moment, that sort of painful moment, and just thinking, if he survives the first wave of the apocalypse, he'll need these meetings as bad as any of us. Boom, mic drop, toilet flush. I'm so glad to be here. And I will end on that. That was amazing.
God.
Thanks, Darren. That was awesome.
Was that like someone giving me the hook? I mean, like, okay, flush the toilet at 30 minutes because he'll go on all night.